The sun had barely cleared the low hills when Theodore reached the outer fence of the hacienda. It was a sprawling place by northern Mexico standards. Whitewashed adobe walls baked the color of bone. Red clay roofs patched and repatched over the years, and corrals stretching wide across the dry grassland. Horses stamped and snorted behind rough-hewn rails. The smell of manure, dust, and old leather hung thick in the morning air. Theodore stopped at the gate and waited. He had learned long ago not to enter uninvited. At 30 years old, he stood just over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, his build lean and hard from years of work that paid little and promised less. His skin bore the unmistakable mark of his Apache blood, dark, weathered, shaped by sun rather than comfort. His hair was tied back low, practical. His clothes were clean, but worn thin. Boots cracked at the seams. He carried no weapon. That, too, was deliberate. After a moment, a foreman approached, chewing something slowly, his eyes narrowing as they traveled over Theodore's face. "What do you want?" the man asked in Spanish. "I'm looking for work," Theodore replied evenly. His accent was faint but noticeable. "I know horse." The foreman snorted. "Everyone knows horse." "I know when they're sick before they go lame," Theodore said. "I know how to calm a stud that's about to kill a boy. I know how to clean stalls so flies don't carry rot." That earned him a longer look. The foreman spat into the dirt. "Wait." Theodore waited. From the main house emerged Owen. He was a large man, thick through the middle, dressed finer than anyone else on the property. His boots were polished. His belt buckle shone. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no and never expected to be. Owen stopped a few feet away and looked Theodore up and down without bothering to hide his contempt. "Apache," he said flatly. It was not a question. "Yes," Theodore answered. Owen's mouth twisted. "Why would I hire you?" Theodore met his gaze without defiance, without submission. "Because your horses are worth more than the men who clean after them." That drew a short, humorless laugh. "You'll take orders," Owen said. "You'll sleep where you're told. You'll be paid when I decide you've earned it." "I didn't come to argue," Theodore replied. "I came to work." Owen studied him another moment, then waved a dismissive hand. "Stalls. If one horse limps because of you, I'll have you beaten and thrown off my land." Theodore nodded once. Understood. That was how it began. The stables were long and low, dark inside despite the open doors. Theodore set to work without complaints, hoveling, scrubbing, hauling water buckets that weighed close to 40 pounds apiece. He moved steadily, efficiently, ignoring the glances cast his way by the other hands. There were many of them, men and women might. Most kept their heads down. That was when he noticed her. She was in the far field, carrying a sack of hay nearly as wide as her shoulders. The sack must have weighed at least 80 pounds, maybe more. It bent her slightly forward, the strap cutting into her collarbone. Her dress was faded and patched. Her boots were caked with mud. She did not stop. Theodore paused, resting his shovel, watching as she crossed the field step by careful step. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat. Strands of hair clung to her cheeks. She looked thin, too thin for work like that. When she reached the barn, the sack slipped. She caught it before it fell, jaw tightening, breath sharp but silent. Without thinking, Theodore walked toward her. "Let me take that," he said, reaching for the strap. She turned quickly, eyes flashing. "No. It's too heavy," he said calmly. "I said no." Her voice was firm, edged with something more than pride. Fear, maybe, or habit. Theodore let his hand fall away. "As you wish." She adjusted the strap and continued on, muscles trembling, spine straight. As she passed him, she muttered, I can do my own work." He watched her go, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Not weak, he thought, just alone. By nightfall, his arms ached and his back burned. But the horses were fed, watered, and calmer than they had been that morning. Theodore noticed things others ignored. One mare favoring her left hind leg, a young colt restless from a cracked hoof. No one thanked him. He slept in a narrow room off the stables, the air thick and close, rain clouds gathering outside. When the storm broke, it came hard and sudden, rain pounding the roofs like thrown gravel. Sometime after midnight, Theodore heard a soft curse carried by the wind. He stepped outside and saw light flickering from the workers' quarters. Water streamed from a broken section of roof, soaking the ground beneath. Emma, he had learned her name from another hand, stood outside her door, staring at the leak, as if willing it to stop. Without a word, Theodore fetched scrap wood and climbed onto the roof. Rain soaked him through in seconds. He worked by feel more than sight, hammering boards into place, sealing gaps with pitch until the water slowed, then stopped. When he climbed down, Emma stood there holding a lantern. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I thought Apache men were cruel." He raised an eyebrow. "And now?" She swallowed. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I was rude to you the first day." Theodore shrugged. Beautiful women are often allowed to be. Her cheeks flushed, color blooming beneath the grime. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time, maybe ever. She ducked her head, embarrassed, and for the first time she smiled. The rain eased. Somewhere a horse whinnied softly, and in that brief, unguarded moment, something shifted small, quiet, but irreversible between the Apache who had come asking for work and the woman who carried hay, as if the world expected nothing less. Morning came pale and dry, the storm leaving behind nothing but the smell of wet earth and the promise of heat. By the time the sun climbed over the eastern ridge, the mud had already begun to crack beneath the weight of boots and hooves. Theodore was back in the stables before most of the hands had finished their first cup of bitter coffee. He worked in the half-light, brushing down the horse, checking legs and hooves the way he had been taught as a boy, slowly, patiently, speaking low, so the animals knew his voice. He did not look for Emma, and yet he noticed when she appeared. She came from the direction of the hay sheds, her sleeves rolled up, shoulders already damp with sweat. Two men followed behind her, laughing as they talked among themselves. When she bent to lift a bale, neither of them moved to help. The bale was square and tightly packed, close to 100 pounds. Emma braced herself, teeth clenched, and heaved it onto her shoulder. The men watched, amused, as if it were a kind of sport. Something tight coiled in Theodore's chest. He stepped forward. "That one's too heavy," he said, keeping his voice even. "Split it." Emma shot him a look sharp enough to cut. "Mind your own work." The men snorted. "She's got more grit than you, Apache," one of them said. Theodore ignored him. He kept his eyes on Emma. "You don't have to prove anything." Her jaw set. "I prove it every day." She walked past him, the bale digging into her shoulder, and for a moment, Theodore considered taking it any old way, force be damned. But he stopped himself. He had learned, through bitter experience, that taking a choice away from someone could wound deeper than any blow. So he watched her go, step by careful step, until she reached the feed trough and let the bale drop with a dull thud. Only then did she pause, breath coming hard, hands braced on her knees. Later, when the yard emptied and the sun stood high enough to bleach the world pale, Theodore found her alone near the well, washing dirt from her hands. "You shouldn't carry that kind of weight alone," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "If I wait for help here, I'll wait forever. He considered that. You won't always be here. That made her laugh, short and humorless. That's what they all say. Then years pass. She turned then, studying him more closely than she had before. Why do you care? Theodore met her gaze. Because I know what it costs. She searched his face as if deciding whether to believe him. Finally, she nodded. Was he? Emma? Theodore. They stood there a moment longer, the well creaking behind them, the sound of horses shifting in the distance. From that day on, they spoke when they could, brief exchanges stolen between tasks, a word here, a look there. Nothing that would draw notice, nothing that could be twisted. But people noticed anyway. The hacienda thrived on watching its own. Rumors traveled faster than the dust devils that crossed the fields. A glance lingered too late, a word spoken too softly. Owen noticed too. He had always noticed Emma. That afternoon, he called her over while Theodore was currying a chestnut mare. You're looking thin, Owen said, his eyes roaming freely. I could have you moved inside. Lighter work. Emma stiffened. I'm fine where I am. Owen smiled, slow and knowing. I could make things easier for you. I don't need favors, she said. His smile vanished. Everyone needs something. Theodore felt the mare tense beneath his hands. He kept his head down, muscles coiled, every instinct screaming at him to intervene. But he did not. Not yet. That night, Emma worked late, hauling the last of the hay into the barn. By the time she finished, the sky had gone dark, stars sharp and cold overhead. She misjudged the step coming down from the loft. The sack slipped. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell, but not before pain shot through her ankle. Theodore was there in 2 strides. Sit, he said. I'm fine, she insisted, trying to put weight on it. She wasn't. Without a word he knelt, fingers gentle as he tested the joint. It was already swelling. You'll make it worse, he said. Let me help. This time she didn't refuse. He lifted the sack from her shoulder, then took her arm and guided her to the edge of the stall. She leaned against the wood, breathing through clenched teeth. I hate this, she said softly, needing help. So do I, Theodore replied. That doesn't make it wrong. He wrapped her ankle with a strip torn from his own shirt, tight enough to support, loose enough not to cut off blood. Why stay here? She asked suddenly. They'll never see you as anything but what you are to them. Theodore tied the knot and sat back on his heels. Because leaving without a place to go is another kind of chain. She considered that. You talk like someone who's run before. He didn't answer. After that, he began quietly shifting the work when he could, taking the heaviest loads himself, before Emma reached them, loosening bales so they were easier to carry, fixing broken tools so they didn't slow her down. She noticed. You don't have to do this, she said one evening. I know, he replied. Her gaze softened. Thank you. It wasn't much. But in a place where gratitude was rare and kindness dangerous, it meant more than either of them said aloud. And though neither spoke it, both understood the truth forming between them. In a land that taught people to survive by hardness alone, even the smallest mercy carried weight, sometimes more than 100-pound bale of hay. The heat settled in early that week, the kind that pressed down on a man's shoulders and stayed there. By mid-morning, the air above the fields shimmered, and the horses grew restless, swishing their tails and stamping as flies gathered thick around their legs. Theodore worked shirtless now, his back darkened by the sun, muscles moving with quiet economy as he mucked stalls and hauled water. Each bucket weighed close to 40 pounds, and he carried 2 at a time, pacing himself the way long habit had taught him. He spoke to the horses more than to the people. Animals, at least, did not pretend. Emma still worked the fields. Her ankle had healed enough for her to walk without favoring it. though Theodore noticed she still moved carefully when she thought no one was watching. She had grown accustomed to his presence, not in the way one grows careless, but in the way one comes to rely on something solid without naming it. They shared water when the overseer wasn't looking. They exchanged small observations, the way the wind was turning, the look of the clouds, the smell of rain long before it arrived. The storm came late on a Thursday night. The sky darkened fast, wind sweeping down from the hills, carrying grit that stung the eyes. Thunder cracked sharp and close, rattling the adobe walls. Rain followed in sheets, heavy and relentless. Theodore woke to the sound of water where it didn't belong. He stepped outside, rain soaking his trousers instantly, and saw light spilling from the workers' quarters. Water streamed off the roof in uneven curtains. One section sagged visibly, the wood beneath swollen and rotten. Emma's room. He crossed the yard at a run. Inside, she stood barefoot on the packed dirt floor, holding her blanket away from the drip that fell steady onto her bed. Her hair hung loose, darkened by damp. Her face, usually set with resolve, was pale with exhaustion. "It's getting worse," she said when she saw him. "I tried moving the bed, but—" "Get out of the rain," Theodore said. He didn't wait for permission. He grabbed a lantern and climbed the ladder to the roof, the rungs slick beneath his hands. Wind tore at his shirt. Rain blurred his vision. He found the break by touch, fingers sinking into softened wood. The repair was rough, but effective. He nailed a board across the worst of it, sealed the gaps with tar he'd taken from the tack shed weeks earlier, then weighted it with stones. By the time he climbed down, he was soaked through, arms trembling from the strain. Inside, the drip had slowed to nothing. Emma stared at the ceiling, then at him. "You'll get sick doing things like that." "Wouldn't be the first time," he said. She handed him a towel. Their fingers brushed briefly, and something passed between them. Uncertain, unspoken. She hesitated, then said, "I owe you an apology." He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For the first day. For thinking things." He waited. "I was taught that Apache men were dangerous," she said quietly, "that they couldn't be trusted." "And now?" Theodore asked. Her eyes held his. "Now I think I was taught wrong." He considered that, then shrugged lightly. "People believe what keeps them safe." She shook her head. "No. Sometimes they believe what keeps them from having to look closer." Silence settled between them, broken only by the rain easing outside. "I'm sorry," she said again. He smiled, faint but real. Beautiful women are often forgiven for worse. Her cheeks flushed, and she laughed softly despite herself. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I forget how to answer." Just that night changed something. Not in any grand or reckless way. There was no promise made, no line crossed. But from then on, their conversations lingered longer. They shared stories in fragments. Emma speaking of years spent in the fields, of a mother buried far from home. Theodore offering pieces of a childhood, shaped by movement, by voices, by learning when to stay silent. People began to notice. A glance held too long. Theodore carrying a bale, meant for Emma. Emma bringing him water without being asked. Whispers followed. One afternoon, Owen cornered Theodore near the stables. "You're getting comfortable," Owen said, voice low. Theodore met his gaze calmly. "I do my work." Owen stepped closer. "I don't pay you to look at my women." "I look at horses," Theodore replied. Owen's smile was thin. "See that you keep it that way." Theodore said nothing. But that night, as he lay awake listening to the wind scrape the walls, he knew the ground beneath them was shifting. The next day, the heat broke. A sudden downpour flooded the lower field, turning dust to mud. Emma slipped while carrying a crate of feed and went down hard. Theodore was at her side before anyone else moved. Her knee was scraped raw, blood mixing with dirt. She tried to laugh it off. "I'm fine," she said. "You're bleeding," he replied. He cleaned the wound gently, his hands steady. She watched him, noticing the scar along his forearm, pale and old. "From a rifle," he said when he saw her looking. "Years ago." She swallowed. "Does it still hurt?" "Only when it rains." She smiled sadly. "Then I suppose you felt it last night." He nodded. Some hurts don't ever leave. They sat there longer than necessary, the rain softening the world around them. Emma spoke first. "If things get worse here." He waited. "I don't want you thinking you owe me anything," she said. "You don't." Theodore looked at her, really looked at her, the strength worn thin by years of labor, the resolve that kept her standing when others bent. "I don't do this because I owe you," he said. "I do it because I choose to." That was when she understood. Not the danger. That was already clear. But the cost. And still, when she met his eyes, she did not look away. Outside, the rain washed the yard clean, as if trying futilely to rinse the world of what it refused to face. The tensions did not arrive all at once. It crept in the way rot did, quiet, patient, hidden beneath the surface until the weight became too much to bear. Owen watched Emma more openly now. He lingered when she passed, found reasons to call her closer, spoke to her in a voice he did not use with others. Promises came wrapped in suggestions. Threats followed when she refused. "You could be inside," he told her one afternoon, his hand resting too casually on the fence rail. "Clean work. Lighter hours." "I'm not interested," Emma said, eyes fixed on the ground. Owen's smile thinned. "Everyone's interested in something." She straightened then, lifting her chin. "You have a wife, children. Leave me alone." For a moment, something dark flickered behind his eyes. Then he laughed, as if amused by a child's defiance. "You'd best be careful," he said softly. "People like you don't last long here without protection." Emma said nothing more. She walked away, on legs that felt unsteady, her heart pounding hard enough to make her dizzy. That night, Owen drank. The sound carried across the yard, the clink of glass, the raised voice, the heavy footsteps that followed long after the lamps should have been blown out. Emma lay awake on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. When the knock came, it was not gentle. She froze. The door opened without waiting for her answer. Owen filled the frame, the smell of liquor sharp on his breath. His eyes were glassy, unfocused in a way that set fear blooming cold and sudden in her chest. "You think you're better than me," he slurred. "Get out," Emma said, pushing herself upright. "Leave now." He laughed and stepped inside, kicking the door shut behind him. "No one tells me what to do in my own house." She moved toward the door. He grabbed her arm. She screamed. It tore from her chest, raw and desperate, echoing into the night. But the hacienda was a place where screams were learned to be ignored. Theodore heard it from the stables. He did not think. He ran. By the time he reached the workers' quarters, the door to Emma's room was shut, Owen's voice low and thick behind it. Theodore did not pause. He drew back his boot and kicked. The door flew open, the latch splintering under the force. Owen spun around, rage flaring across his face. Emma stood pressed against the wall, trembling, her dress torn at the sleeve. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Theodore moved. His fist connected with Owen's jaw, hard enough to send him staggering back into the table. Glass shattered. Owen roared and lunged, but Theodore was faster, stronger, fueled by something older than fear. Another blow. Then another. Owen fell hard, sprawling across the floor. "You'll regret this," Owen spat, blood on his lips. "You won't leave this place alive." Theodore stood over him, chest heaving, hands clenched. He said nothing. He turned to Emma instead. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears streaking her face. I tried to scream." "You did," Theodore said. "That's enough." He led her out into the night, away from the broken door and the man on the floor. They did not make it far before the other hands appeared, drawn by the noise. They looked at Owen, then at Theodore. And then, one by one, they looked away. Owen's men moved quickly after that. Theodore was dragged to the yard and beaten with fists and boots until his vision blurred and his ribs burned with every breath. Owen stood nearby watching, his jaw set in satisfaction. "That's your warning," Owen said. "You touch what's mine again, and you'll be buried where no one will miss you." They left Theodore in the dirt. Emma knelt beside him once the yard emptied, her hand shaking as she pressed a cloth to his split lip. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "I never wanted this to happen to you." Theodore winced as she cleaned the blood from his cheek. His face was already swelling, one eye darkening. "Don't," he said hoarsely. "You didn't cause this." She shook her head. "If I hadn't." He reached for her hand, fingers curling around hers despite the pain. His grip was steady. "I chose," he said. "From the moment I kicked that door, I chose." Her breath caught. "Why?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if the bruises and threats and fear had stripped the world down to its barest truth. "Because I love you," he said simply. The words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. She leaned forward, pressing her lips to his, gentle at first, then desperate, tasting blood and sorrow. It was not a careful kiss. It was a vow made without witnesses. They pulled apart only when he hissed in pain. "You're hurt," she said, panic flooding back. "I've been hurt before," he replied. "This was worth it." They sat together in the dark, Emma cradling his battered face, the world around them heated and indifferent. Neither of them spoke of what would come next, but both understood the truth now, clear as the stars breaking through the clouds above. There would be no safety here anymore, only choices and consequences. The morning came hard and bright, the kind of light that showed every bruise and offered no mercy. Theodore woke on a pallet near the stables, his body stiff and aching, as if every bone had been counted and found wanting. His ribs screamed when he drew breath. One eye was swollen nearly shut. Dried blood crusted along his mouth. Emma was there, kneeling beside him, holding a tin cup of water. "Easy," she said when he tried to sit up. "You cracked 2 ribs, maybe more." He gave a crooked smile. "You sound like a doctor." "I've seen enough broken men here to recognize one." She helped him drink. The water was warm, but it eased the fire in his throat. "You should have let them finish me," he murmured. "Would have been simpler." She shook her head fiercely. "Don't say that, not ever." Before he could answer, heavy footsteps crossed the yard. Owen's wife arrived like a storm that had been gathering all night. Maria was a tall woman, straight-backed, dressed in mourning black, though her husband still lived. Years of managing the household had hardened her face into something sharp and watchful. 2 servants followed her, eyes fixed on the ground. She stopped a few feet from Emma. "What happened?" Maria demanded. Owen appeared behind her, freshly washed, a bandage wrapped around his jaw. He did not look at Theodore. "She tried to seduce me," Owen said calmly. "When I refused, she screamed. The Apache attacked me." Emma stared at him, disbelief stealing her breath. "That's a lie," she said. "You came into my room." Maria raised her hand. "Enough." Her gaze cut to Emma, cold and appraising. "Is this true?" Emma looked to the others gathered nearby, the hands, the servants, the men who had heard her scream and turned away. One by one, they lowered their eyes. No one spoke. Emma's voice shook. "Please, ask them." Silence answered. Maria's mouth tightened. She stepped forward and struck Emma across the face, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "You disgrace this house," Maria said. "You think I don't know what women like you do to climb out of the dirt?" Emma tasted blood. "You are dismissed," Maria continued. "Leave my property before sundown. Take nothing." Emma swayed but did not fall. Theodore tried to stand. Two men blocked him. "You'll go too," Maria said without looking at him. "You are Fleecian. Both of you." Owen finally turned then, his eyes glittering. "Be grateful I don't have you killed." Emma's hands trembled as she gathered the few things she owned. A spare dress, her mother's comb. Nothing more. The workers' quarters felt suddenly foreign, every wall closing in. Outside, Theodore waited, leaning heavily against the fence. His face was a map of pain, but his eyes were clear. "I'm leaving with you," he said. She shook her head, tears spilling over. "You shouldn't. You'll die if you stay near me." He reached out, cupping her cheek gently despite the swelling in his fingers. "Where you go, I go." She pressed her forehead to his. "I owe you my life." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Then you owe me a wedding and a few children. Fair trade." She sobbed into his chest, holding him, as if letting go might undo everything. They left as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the yard. They did not go empty-handed. Theodore led her to the far corral, where Owen kept his best horse, a tall black stallion bred for endurance, worth more than a year's wages. The animal recognized Theodore's voice and came willingly. "This one?" Emma whispered. "This one," Theodore said. They rode hard through the night, Emma pressed against Theodore's back, arms tight around his waist, as the stallion carried them away from the hacienda, and everything it had taken. By dawn, the land had changed. The hard-packed dirt gave way to open grassland, rolling and green from recent rains. A narrow creek cut through the valley, its banks thick with cottonwood and wildflowers. They dismounted there, both trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. "This place," Emma said softly. "No one will look for us here." Theodore nodded. "We can build." They did. The cabin was small, no more than 16 by 20 feet, but it was theirs. Theodore cut the logs himself, his movements slow but determined, ribs protesting with every swing of the axe. Emma hauled water, gathered stones, planted the first seeds in the soft earth by the creek. She chose sunflowers. "They turn toward the light," she said simply. At night, they lay together beneath a roof that did not leak, listening to the water move and the wind through the grass. They were not rich. They were not safe in the way towns pretended safety existed. But they were free, and for the first time in either of their lives, no one stood between them and the truth of who they were. The first winter tested them. Cold settled into the valley early, riding the creek at night and creeping through the chinks in the cabin walls. Frost rimed the grass each morning, and the sun took its time reaching over the low hills. Some days it never felt warm at all. Theodore rose before dawn, easing himself upright with care. His ribs still ached when the weather turned, a deep reminder of what it had cost to leave. He split wood slowly, measuring each swing, saving his strength the way men who had nearly lost everything learned to do. Emma learned the land. She learned how the creek swelled after rain and shrank in dry weeks. She learned which grasses stayed green longest and which patches of soil held moisture, even when the ground baked hard. She learned how to trap rabbits, how to stretch hides, how to read the ski the way people read letters. They worked without counting hours. Some days they spoke little, the silence companionable. Other days they talked as if afraid the world might take their words away. They planned small things: first a better door, A second window. A corral, sturdy enough to keep a horse safe at night. The black stallion adapted quickly, grazing contentedly, no longer restless under the weight of ownership. Theodore tended him with the same quiet care he had always given horses races, speaking low, brushing down his coat until it shone even in poor light. Spring came slow and stubborn. When the snow melted, it revealed the sunflowers Emma had planted pushing through the earth. Their green shoots were fragile at first, but they held, growing taller each day, turning instinctively toward the sun. "They don't ask permission," Emma said once, watching them sway in the breeze. "No," Theodore agreed. "They just grow." They built more as the months passed. A second room, a lean-to for supplies, a fence not to keep others out, but to mark where their work began. Theodore's body healed, though it never fully forgot. Some mornings he moved stealthily, pausing before lifting heavier loads. Emma noticed and adjusted without comment, taking more on herself when needed, just as he once had. They became a partnership before they ever spoke of marriage. One evening, as the sky burned orange and red behind the hills, Theodore handed Emma a simple ring he had shaped from silver traded for pelts. It was plain and slightly uneven. "I don't have words for promises," he said. "Only work." She slid the ring onto her finger. "That's enough." They married themselves beside the creek, no witnesses but the cottonwoods and the stallion grazing nearby. Emma wore a clean dress, sewn from feed sacks. Theodore stood barefoot in the water, his reflection broken by the current. They did not say vows. They already knew them. Years passed, marked not by dates, but by seasons. They had children, first a son, then a daughter. The boy learned to walk by gripping his father's fingers, dark eyes watchful and curious. The girl laughed at the sound of water, reaching for the creek as if she recognized something ancient there. The cabin grew worn in the best way, scratched floors, door frames marked with height, a table carved with years of meals and planning. Word of them spread quietly. Travelers stopped by sometimes, asking for water, for directions. Theodore helped when he could. Emma fed those who were hungry. They did not ask questions that didn't matter. One summer evening, long after the children had fallen asleep, Emma and Theodore sat on the porch they'd built with their own hands. Fireflies drifted through the tall grass. The sunflowers stood heavy with seed. "Do you ever think about going back?" Emma asked. Theodore considered it. "No," she nodded. "Neither do I." They had heard rumors over the years of Owen growing richer, of his wife growing colder, of the hacienda expanding until it swallowed more land than it could tend. None of it touched them. What they had was smaller and stronger. Emma leaned her head against Theodore's shoulder. His arm settled around her, solid and familiar. "We weren't meant to be owned," she said softly. "No," he replied. "Only to choose." Above them, the stars stretched wide and indifferent, the same stars that had watched countless lives struggle and endure. The creek murmured on, steady and patient. In that quiet, the truth of their lives stood clear. They had not defeated the world. They had simply stepped beyond its reach. And in doing so, they had built something no cruelty, no lie, and no claim of power could. This was a story about dignity, courage, and choosing freedom when the world offers only silence. If this journey moved you, please hit subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment so I can continue bringing you even more meaningful stories. Thank you all for listening.